Hello and welcome to the Lounge with Luke Gilfillan. Today we got a couple things to go over, all of them related to the same general topic. Over the past probably week and a half, you've seen a lot of almost every story unilaterally across the country. Well, my central air just went off. Okay, across the country has been on the issue of race almost unilaterally. The coronavirus has left the news and a bigger issue has come to replace it. So, first off, this is actually not this is actually not related to anything about race, but it is a story from Oak Park. This is by Stacy Sheridan, our favorite reporter over here at the Lounge with Luke Gilfillan. Man shot in an arm and leg on Chicago Avenue. A Chicago man was shot in the arm and leg on Tuesday night near the BP gas station on 100th Chicago Avenue. It is as yet unclear whether the man was shot on the Oak Park side or the Austin side of Austin Boulevard. Oak Park police arrived in the area at about 11:50 p.m. Tuesday, June 2nd, after receiving reports of shots fired. According to the this was Tuesday night. Okay. According to the Oak Park spokesman David Powers, neighbors reported seeing two suspicious vehicles in the area. Police officers stopped a vehicle matching a general description provided by the neighbors at Erie Street and Austin Boulevard. Investigators determined that the vehicle's occupants had taken a man to West Suburban Hospital after he apparently had been shot on Chicago Avenue, said Powers. The individual, a 25-year-old Chicago man, was shot in the arm and leg. The injured man told police he was walking alone on Chicago Avenue when he heard gunshots and discovered that he had been hit. The man said a random car transported him to the hospital. He appears to be in stable condition and is expected to be transferred to Stroger Hospital for further treatment. The investigation is ongoing. So that's a story that I found on the Wednesday Journal website and I completely forgot about until now when it was the first tab open in my list of stories to cover on the Lounge with Luke Gilfillan. All of the stories I'm going to cover are local news related this time. We got one from Michael Romaine and then we got another from... Is it Michael Romaine who did this? I know there was a lot of controversy over which reporter were to do this story. Yep, it was Michael Romaine who also... Wait. No, it was Maria Maxim. Okay. So I know I'm going to give you the inner scoop on the Wednesday Journal reporting, okay? So each Wednesday Journal reporter has different... So Maria Maxim and Stacy Sheridan and someone else, they all have different boundaries for the Oak Park and River Forest area on stories they can cover. So I think Stacy Sheridan has parts of River Forest, and then Maria Maxim has some other parts of River Forest and a lot of Oak Park, and Stacy Sheridan also has Oak Park and stuff. So that's that. So Stacy Sheridan was very upset. I heard this is the inner scoop. Okay. Stacey Sheridan was very upset that this incident that happened in Jewel, which we're going to cover at the end of this podcast, was not in her boundary. And so originally she tried to get the story because the tweet that posted the video of this alleged racial battery in the Jewel-Osco said that the Jewel-Osco was in Oak Park, which would I don't know if there's a separate Jewel-Osco in Oak Park than the one in River Forest. So she tried to get the story from this person, but Maria Maxham, she got it first. She just wrote the story based on she interviewed no one else, no witnesses, and she got all the traffic from the Facebook moms and whatever. And Stacey Sheridan, before the original tweet corrected to say that it was the River Forest Jewel-Osco as opposed to the Oak Park Jewel-Osco, Stacey Sheridan tried to get the story based on the tweet saying it was in the Oak Park Jewel-Osco. So that's a thing. And then you've also got reporters that cover certain issues, like Michael Romaine. He covers race for the Wednesday Journal. I don't know if that's specifically drawn out, but every story about race, whether it's at the high school, protests from the high school, or what's going on right now, it's all written by him, with the exception of this one by Maria Maxam, who jumped on that story so fast. When did she post this? June 4th. Okay. No, that was this morning. Okay. Never mind. She posted it this morning. So, she Took a day, maybe less than a day, probably like 8 hours. 8 hours from the time the thing was posted. She posted this. No, it wasn't 8 hours. It was well over 12. So it was posted at 6. I'm doing math here in my head. Just goes 6 to 12. 18 hours. So 18 hours after the video came out, she did that, which is pretty fast. It's pretty fast, but not fast enough. Well, no, it was fast enough. I can't believe I said that. I lied to you, and I will be putting that as an error in the description. You know, I've actually only used that feature like twice. If you go to the description of my podcast, it says errors in the description, and then it usually says none so far. And that was it originally when I posted errors. I think the first error I had was on my first podcast. I mispronounced Beto O'Rourke's name. Remember Beto O'Rourke, the guy from Texas that ran for senator against Ted Cruz, and then because of that, everyone really liked him. And then he ran for president, and no one liked him because Beto O'Rourke was only useful when he was going against Ted Cruz, not when he was running for the presidency. So that was that. Also, he was a furry, so that was interesting. Furries, for those who don't know, are people that put on like these. Okay, so I got a haircut recently, not like a haircut like at home. I did that earlier during the whole quarantine thing, but I got a haircut like at a haircut place. You know, it's called Chicago's Cuts. I can't tell you exactly where it is, but it's in like a plaza that got like looted recently and whatever. And I want to say it's in Melrose Park, but it's probably not in Melrose Park. But either way, it's a Chicago cut store. It's an amazing business. It's very cool. All the haircut people are very nice and whatever. One of them was was talking about like memes he had seen on Facebook and showing me memes and stuff while he was cutting my hair. It was very cool. It's a very cool place. I would recommend it if you're. I think they specialize in male hair, but if you're a female, you should also get your hair cut there. I'd imagine they wouldn't turn you away. But yeah, look up Chicago Cuts. Very great place. Would highly recommend it. They're very high quality, though I'm not a hair expert, but they're very good at what they do, I presume. I'm not sure, but they're very cool and they're a great business, and I would recommend them. I couldn't recommend them more. But either way, so this plaza that they were in, where it was in the news because apparently the police, like, there were people that allegedly did, they said they did nothing, though the police say that they were, like, looting the local, there was, like, the AC's on again, so you might hear a little background noise. There was I think it was, like, a shoe store, but it was in the same plaza where they were at, and allegedly they were looting the plaza, and as they were getting in their car, like, this group of 12 policemen ran towards their car, told them to get out, and then when they didn't get out, they broke the window to the car and then dragged them out. And so there was a news story on that because the people were alleging that it was improper police conduct. And so either way, the reason that I bring this up is because while this was playing on WGN, and there was like this news reporter with the WGN thing outside, and they were at the scene where the thing took place, and they were like, "So Jim, it's a really empty scene out here after 12 hours after the incident allegedly took place. You can see the video there, you know how the WGN reporters do it." So there was a WGN news crew outside, and they were live on the thing while I was in the haircut place, and they were like right outside the window. It was very cool. So either way, the reason I bring this up was because the guy who owned the Chicago Cuts thing, it was like, "Yo, I was out here last night. It was crazy, bro. It was like a movie." And I brought, like, I think he said he brought a gun, but I don't know if this is true. And I was like, I was out here near the store. I was making sure no one came by. So that was interesting. And then, why did I even bring? You know, I'm very good at doing these talking things in Lounge with Luke Gilfillan, because I haven't done a Lounge with Luke Gilfillan in the while, and I have to tell you all about these crazy stories that have happened that are related to local news somehow. I wonder if you guys are losing interest. I guarantee you that the only people watching right now are probably my dad. My dad watches all these things. Thank you, Dad, for watching. We really appreciate it over here at the Lounge with Luke Gilfillan. And my grandma, who watches them like 4 years late. No, I'm kidding. Like a week late, and then she's like, "Oh, I gotta catch up," and yeah. So, thank you, Grandma and Dad, for sticking around this long in the podcast. Really, really appreciate it. So, otherwise, at least 1,500. This is according to Michael Romaine over here at the Wednesday over at the Wednesday Journal. Not over here. I'm not part of the Wednesday Journal. I don't think I will ever be part of the Wednesday Journal. If the Wednesday Journal were to open back up, and I were to not have employment opportunities elsewhere, I would likely be interested in like an internship at the Wednesday Journal. I think that would be fun, an interesting learning experience. I think that would be a great idea that is unparalleled in our universe. At least 1,500 people marched down from Oak Park Village Hall, 123 Madison Street. I already read this, didn't I? Floyd died handcuffed while Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin held his knee on Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes, and 3 other officers looked on. Chauvin has since been arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The other 3 officers have been charged with aiding and abetting the crime, court records show. So yeah, if you haven't seen the video of the George Floyd murder, you can look that up. It's all over the internet. I'd actually be doubtful that anyone hasn't seen the video. But if you haven't, it's a very horrible video, and all the officers involved should go to jail. Though there was something I was reading about the second-degree murder charge. I'm not a legal expert and whatever, but you've seen in the past where these high-profile incidents would occur, and then the prosecutors, built up on like public outrage, would overcharge the things. Because when you're charging a crime, you want to charge a crime that actually occurred. So I'm going to look up the different qualifications for murder. I have difficulty typing while talking. So second degree murder, Minnesota definition. I'm very slow at typing, so that's why you're hearing all this. So, the thing that comes to mind, and so it's very unlikely that this guy didn't know him, and it's very possible that Derek Chauvin had a personal grievance with George Floyd, and he targeted him because of that, and that's why the family was pushing for first degree. The family of George Floyd wanted first-degree murder, and it's important to recognize that there are different penalties for first-degree murder and like all those different categories, but you do not want to charge people for a crime that they didn't specifically commit. You do not want to do that, even if the penalties are higher. And everyone wants to see this guy go to jail for life, but that may not be a possibility, because we'll read the stanzas of murder, because different crimes or different like standards of murder or manslaughter and stuff, they have different definitions, specific definitions, and you need to make sure those definitions are filled, because otherwise you could see Derek Chauvin walk free. And you saw that in the Trayvon Martin case. Trayvon Martin case was much, much different, but they overcharged. They charged some people with something that could not be justified in a court, and when a jury is deciding a decision, they have to see whether that specific charge was in accordance with the law, and your outrage and the method of murder and implications of all of it, it does not matter in the court of law, because our justice system is set up to determine whether a specific crime was committed. So, and that does not mean that you're taking it less seriously or you're less angry if you say that second-degree murder is overcharging or first-degree murder would be overcharging. That's probably more. That probably means you may take it more seriously because you're not just doing blind outrage and you actually want to see the guy go to jail. Because if you overcharge this, you could. There's a lot of people are. I read some like David French column. David French is we've read his columns here on the Lounge Blue Gilfillan before, and he was a constitutional lawyer who gave up his high-paying job to become a journalist at the. I don't know where he writes. Does he write for the National Review? He's like a hardcore constitutionalist that writes for journalist publications. Okay, so here's in Minnesota. This is according to statelaws.findlaw.com. It was the first Google result. Second-degree murder in the state of Minnesota is an intentional killing, but is less serious than first-degree murder because some malicious factors aren't present. So, second-degree murder is intentional killing. So, in order to prove second-degree murder, which is the current charge that Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota, is charging Derek Chauvin specifically with, is that he intentionally tried to kill George Floyd. If you're going to present that, you need some evidence, and you need hard evidence as to prove that, because you do not want to overcharge. That is the biggest thing, and it is a very bad thing. And Keith Ellison knows this. And I presume that if he were to overcharge like this, that he would have evidence that we don't have, maybe in like hidden police evidence that is not like public yet, that Derek. What happened in the Trayvon Martin story was there was this guy named George Zimmerman. He was the part of the civilian crime watch. I don't know the specific thing, but in this Florida neighborhood, which was seeing a lot of crime, particularly like burglaries, I believe was the specific crime. They had this civilian police or crime watch team who would go around, and if they would see a crime, they would call the police, and they'd be like, "Yo, crime is happening, can you guys come here?" And then the police would come, and then that was the purpose of the thing. So George Zimmerman sort of thought of him was like a vigilante type, I guess. He was like I wanted to be the vigilante getting all the bad guys and whatever. So George Zimmerman was carrying a gun, and he saw Trayvon Martin, who was a black man who he thought fit the description of a person that was seen in a burglary. I can't remember if it was specific, because George Zimmerman's home had been burglarized. I don't know if... I think there's different definitions for burglary and robbery. I believe robbery, there has to be a person present. I don't know whether it was a burglary or a robbery. I don't know whether George Zimmerman saw the person doing this or if he caught him on some security cape. So George Zimmerman saw this guy walking down the sidewalk, Trayvon Martin, and he thought it fit the description of someone who had either burglarized his home or another one. And so he started following Trayvon Martin in his car. He began stalking him. And Trayvon Martin, I don't know if he went into the park or not, but Trayvon Martin went to a park to avoid George Zimmerman, at which point George Zimmerman got out of his car and continued to follow Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was aware that George Zimmerman was following him, and he turned around and attacked George Zimmerman. So and probably rightly so, maybe not rightly so. He probably should have avoided him, gone to a police station, maybe called 911 saying there's this guy following me. But what instead, he turned around. I believe there was a verbal altercation, which then escalated to Trayvon Martin attacking George Zimmerman, who was stalking him, and slamming his head into the pavement repeatedly, and multiple eyewitnesses corroborated that. And then while George Zimmerman was being slammed into the ground, he took his gun and shot Trayvon Martin multiple times, killing him. And what happened in that case in the aftermath, you probably could have gotten him on you probably could have gotten George Zimmerman on manslaughter. And after that, I believe there was talk about the stand your ground laws, though I don't think the defense was arguing stand your ground. And the stand your ground laws are laws that say if you are attacked while you're in a certain spot, you don't have any obligation to run away or leave that spot. You can defend that spot and use lethal force if necessary to defend yourself in that position if you're attacked. Stand your ground was not applied there, but for some reason there was like a little talk about it. What was applied by the defense was self-defense, and George Zimmerman was charged with, I don't know if it was, what was George Zimmerman charged with? Okay, we're looking that up. What was George Zimmerman charged? He was let off, right? State of Florida versus George Zimmerman was a criminal prosecution of George Zimmerman on the charge of second-degree murder. So they charge him with second-degree murder, which is the same charge that is being put against and every decent human being hopes he goes to jail. It's important that the prosecutor recognizes that and doesn't go off of public outrage and overcharge to say, we take this seriously or something like that. You need to charge. If this is not like a perfect analogy, but it's important. It's an analogy that I'm gonna give to make it better, give a better understanding of what I'm saying here. If someone were to rob a convenience store, you wouldn't charge them with bank robbery and say, I take this more seriously, or I'm somehow being harsher on the police officers or on the guy that robbed the store because I'm charging them with bank robbery when they robbed a convenience store. Okay, you need to charge them with the crime that occurred. So yeah, that was actually a pretty good analogy. I'd like to pat myself on the back for that amazing analogy on the bank robbery versus the convenience store analogy. So I'd like to take a bow. I'm taking a bow on the lounge. First ever bow on the lounge of the Gilfillan. Alright, that's my amazing analogy on why overcharging is a bad thing. Chris Simmons stood on the westbound side. This is going back to the Michael Romaine article that we somehow have been trying to cover for the past 30 minutes probably, and somehow have never gotten to. I blame myself, and that is my fault for doing so. Chris Simmons stood on the westbound side of Madison Street as the protesters, most of them white, streamed past her. The sight brought Simmons to tears. Everybody's trying to make peace. That touched my heart, she said. The 55-year-old Austin resident says she's been depressed over the last several days, as much as Chicago and the west and the suburbs have been ransacked by looting, vandalism, and arson in the wake of George Floyd's death. I've been scared to go to work, Simmons said. I'm afraid out here, so I just want everybody to come together. I love this. At least somebody's fighting for our rights. But some black bystanders were more ambivalent about Thursday's demonstration, which was organized by State Representative LaShawn K. Ford, 4th District, and other West Side community leaders. I strongly feel that white people are beginning to understand, said Beatrice Starks, as she stood outside of the A.A. Rainers and Sons funeral home, 5911 West Madison Street. I like to see this, but are they true? Starks' friend Sandra Turner, 72, said, that's my concern. The bottom line is, if they're so into us, why didn't they try to do something prior to this? Starbucks added that the white demonstrators might be true to what they're doing, but it won't do good for us at the bottom if they don't care of what needs to be taken care of at the top. We're both educators, Stark said. We both work in the school system to try and teach these children how to think. They weren't born a racist, that you weren't born to hate, and you weren't taught to hate. So we have to start teaching history. History has left the building. Everything is technology now. They're not teaching history anymore. That history informed the angry lament of 60-year-old Terry Carter, who was a child during the 1968 riots. Carter of Austin stood on the corner of Madison and Park side shouting an eye for an eye as demonstrators walked by peacefully. So this guy wants Derek Chauvin to presumably get the death penalty, which is fair. If anyone deserves the death penalty, it probably would go terrorists, Boston Marathon bomber, Derek Chauvin, and school shooters before Derek Chauvin. This is nothing new, Carter, in terms of the people that deserved it, in terms of the evil of their crimes, as opposed to like their what. So again, the message of the Avatar: The Last Airbender show was a thing about how collectivism can be dangerous, and judging people. No, I can't go to that conclusion and say the message yet. I need to explain the premise of the show and why it showed that it was bad. Okay, so what happened was the bad nation, though, as the show comes to the end, they could do a good job of like saying that not everyone in the Fire Nation is bad or whatever, and so there's the different tribes, the Water Nation, the things, and they're all divided like that. And so what happened between these different like nations is they begin to develop animosities as they label everyone in these different nations as uncivilized or savage or evil or traitors or stupid or whatever. And what happens is the Fire Nation originally, they basically develop like a imperialistic sense of the world, and they adopt this, like, I guess the best way to call it is like racism, if you were to say that these airbenders and whatever were different races. And so what they did was, in order to justify their colonial holdings, this is much like what happened in the real world with the UK, in order to justify their colonial holdings in the Earth Kingdom and their suppression of the Earth Kingdom people, they would say the Earth Kingdom people were uncivilized while the Fire Nation people were prosperous and whatever. And so this brought them to war with the Earth Kingdom, and in order to do this expansion, they ended up wiping out the air nomad population in like a genocide and whatever, and in order to kill the Avatar, which was this like big powerful being that could have stopped their whole plan. But they tried to kill him while he was young, while he was like an infant, like Moses. Okay, while I was talking, I just realized that the air nomad genocide was a biblical reference. The air nomad genocide was a biblical reference to the Exodus and Moses, where the Pharaoh of Egypt tried to kill every Israelite child to decrease their population, and I think get rid of Messiah. But I'm gonna have to refresh myself on Exodus as to what exactly happened. I don't know if that comes in Exodus or Genesis. I don't know if it's the very end of Genesis when the Pharaoh kills all the Israelite children. But either way, Moses escaped. Okay, so Moses, the Israelite mother of Moses, well, the Egyptian military is going around to Israelite household and killing Israelite children because they were scared that the population would end up outnumbering the population of Israelites, because they were having a lot more babies, would end up outnumber. Okay, a lot of revelations are coming. Okay. They were scared that the population of the Israelites would outnumber the Egyptians, and the Egyptians would lose power in Egypt. And the Israelites were used as like slaves for the Egyptians in this time. So they sent the Egyptian army to Israelite households to kill every Jewish baby, basically, because they wanted to lower the population. So what this Jewish mother does is she puts her baby in a basket woven from like reeds from the Nile, and they put it down, then they send it along the Nile River downstream, and a wealthy, or a a person of the Egyptian nobility, I think she was the daughter of the pharaoh at the time. She sees this basket and sends out a servant to go retrieve the basket from the river. And I think we're way off topic here, but you know what? It's all for The Last Airbender and to talk about this quote. And they get this basket from the river. She sees this baby inside, and she'll be like, I'll call it Moses, which means drawn from the river. And so Moses grows up as an Egyptian thing. He eventually becomes to sympathize with the Israelites and becomes God's chosen one and leads the Jews out of Egypt, out of slavery. So, that is what Aang is supposed to be in The Last Airbender. Aang is Moses. Aang is Moses. Aang is Moses. Because he escaped the air nomad genocide. I know Eric Hankes was a big Avatar The Last Airbender fan, so if he happens to watch this all the way out here, I'm sure his mind is blown. Okay, I'm sorry. So Aang is Moses basically like frees everyone, destroys the Fire Lord who was like oppressing people and whatever. And so the central premise of the show was collectivism is bad because it groups people into different categories, and these different categories, if they go along with animosities like you see in this. So I just had to pause it again and unpause it because 10-minute marker. We're probably going to get like well over an hour at the Lounge of the Good because there's a lot to discuss. So if you want to see that YouTube video, look up Foundation for Economic Education, or no, just look up Out of Frame, The Last Airbender. They have this little series, Out of Frame, where they analyze like movies and TV shows and stuff, and they look for like messages behind that and whatever. And it's a very good series. I would recommend watching that episode. To be honest, I've only seen like 3 episodes of that, but The Last Airbender was a very good thing from that. LeVar Ammons just posted. LeVar Ammons was that person they hired last year instead of hiring a principal. He was our racial equity director at OPRF. He just posted out a statement, I see, and we'll read that after we go through all the articles that we haven't been able to go through. I just got an email about that. Okay, a bunch of things are opening. So, message, okay. So, that's an episode. That's a video I definitely recommend you watch. I think I need to get better on the Lounge with Gilfillan with staying on topic and getting right to the point. Maybe that's not such a good thing because then I get to like talk for an hour, and I'm sure my dad and grandpa or grandma are very pleased that I have all this Lounge with Gilfillan content to do. So yeah, that was my criticism of that. Him talking about the European race like that. It's collectivism, it divides us, it's very bad, and it leads to very bad things, as it almost has always led to that, especially if you divide it based on race. For some white protesters, George Floyd's death was an opportunity to finally confront and take ownership of that painful history. Take ownership? I'm sorry, you don't have to take ownership of the sins of FDR or Andrew Johnson. You don't have to take ownership of that. That's not you. You don't have to. Suggesting that people need to take ownership of things that people like 100 years ago or people now have done because of their race is a horrible suggestion, and it will lead to nothing good. Nothing. Absolutely nothing good. And it's just stupid and wrong. One of my realizations is that white people have to stand up and lead on this, said Tom Kofsky, an Oak Park resident who also sits on District 200 Oak PRF School Board. This is our problem. We have to own it. Again, no. You do not have to own the murder of George Floyd. You do not do that. Derek Chauvin, that piece of shit, did that. That's probably the first swear you've heard on the Lounge with the Gilfillan. Dana Langhan, I was going to say I apologize for that, but I don't apologize for that. That was entirely justified. Dana Langhan's 24 of Oak Park held a sign that read, "White inaction is violence." No. Okay. I've been hearing a lot of like bumper sticker slogans, and what I mean by bumper sticker slogans is slogans that are usually like 5 words long, and they usually rhyme, and then they get retweeted by 12-year-old girls on Instagram. Retweeted on Instagram, yeah, and they just say that. So white inaction is violence. No, violence is violence. It's stupid to compare things to violence. You see, like, speech is violence or everything is violence, but the difference between FDR and slaveholders is that anti-racist activism was widespread during the time, but FDR was a racist in a time when non-racism was uh, when anti-racism was beginning to become a huge thing. I apologize. I don't know why I'm doing that. So he was the evil in the time when evil was not as quite as widespread, and he was living in what would become modern America, and he was having all these horrible views. So FDR should not be recognized as one of our greatest presidents. He does deserve. I want to preface this. He does deserve credit for how he handled World War II. He did a fantastic job there. Otherwise, there's not a single part of FDR's record that is good. The New Deal is estimated to have extended the length of the Great Depression by when did FDR take office? Was it 1932? When did FDR take office? And you won't hear this in public schools. In public schools, in 1933 is when he took office, and until 1941, with the beginning of World War II, the Great Depression was existed. So almost a decade of economic ruin. So the Great Depression was originally just a stock market collapse, okay? The bankers in Europe had been overestimating and they were beginning to go under because of bad investments after World War I. And at the beginning, the American economy was a little bit insulated from that. And then the stock market plunged because everyone was like, guys, the economy is not nearly as good as we think it is. So as the stock market plunged, people started taking money out of banks, and then that caused all the people to run on the banks. And this caused a massive economic downturn, and the economy was completely jacked up and very, very bad. This was just a natural economic downturn due to bad information in the thing, kind of like 2008. And so we're going to go over FDR's entire record. And this is like the least of the worst stuff. And so what happened there is afterward, and for some reason the narrative in public schools is completely contrary to this. Afterwards, Herbert Hoover, who was the president at the time, he started to do a little, he was very unpopular because during the Great Depression, as it hit, a bunch of World War I veterans who were promised a bonus 10 years, or I don't know, 30 years after the war ended, they were promised a war bonus of $10,000 or whatever after the war ended. And so these people who were out of a job because of the stock market collapse, they all went to D.C. and essentially threatened to overthrow the government if they didn't get their war bonuses now. And the war bonuses were not guaranteed to them now, they were guaranteed to them in the future, but they wanted it now. And there was all these veterans that marched on D.C., and so what Herbert Hoover did, and it was probably one of the worst political decisions. So it is now the morning, and I believe I finished talking about FDR's New Deal failure and how the public schools should stop teaching their students that the New Deal ended the Great Depression, considering that the Great Depression continued throughout the New Deal and actually well, what, it was like 3 years from the time the stock market crashed towards when FDR took office, or 4 years actually. And then after that, that continued until 1941. So the FDR induced Great Depression lasted twice as long as the initial Great Depression. So there you guys go on that matter. Otherwise, what was I just naming reasons that I don't like FDR? I think I was. FDR practiced Woodrow Wilson's doctrine of politics and administration, they called it, with reference to governmental powers, specifically the federal government. The politics and administration doctrine basically said that the ways that government functions is there are two real branches, and those branches are politics and administration. So the politics part is the deliberation about what laws should go into place and the elections, and that's basically the politics part made up the, in Woodrow Wilson's mind, the politics part was the legislative and the executive. They weren't, the powers were politics and administration as opposed to legislative, executive, and judicial in terms of governmental power and how they exercise that power. So what Woodrow Wilson did and what FDR expanded on is he would try and take over the administration part of it and completely leave up the politics part to the president, specifically the progressive presidents. So that would be Woodrow Wilson and FDR over the course of all that time. And these progressive presidents, they would do all the politics. So the Congress would be completely obliterated. Their powers were useless because overall the powers that only mattered were the politics and administration, and that's how governments work. So Congress, in order to get around Congress, he would have Congress pass these bills giving wide range of powers and delegations to the president. So they would, and you would see this a lot in the modern day too. The legislative would pass these bills saying, we want clean air, or we want you to fix the economy, or we want you to fix the banks, and no specifics in terms of that. And it would be up to the president to decide how to go about that. So Congress would give these broad directives because they were going off of the anti-Herbert Hoover things, as a result, anti-Herbert Hoover sentiment as a result of the bonus march and the stock market collapse. And FDR would be up. It would be up to FDR to figure out how to fix the economy. And so naturally, what FDR would do is he would put in place a bunch of administrative agencies. So like the Work and Projects Administration, that's the first one that comes to mind, or the other things. And he would give these administrations broad directives saying like, oh, I want you to go build the Hoover Dam. And then these administrative agencies would have all this money. They'd get like billions of dollars a year. And then it would be up to these administrators, these unelected administrators, to decide what to do with all of it. So the power is no longer in the legislators' hands. It's now in the power of these administrators, because they're the ones that decides what the government does, not the administrators. The legislators. The legislators gave all the power to the administrators, and we still have that today. So when you vote for a congressman, you're actually not really voting for people that are going to be legislating. The people that are going to be legislating are unelected administrators that have been in their jobs for 50 years and are deciding whether to go after John Lodge, who decided to put up what do you call those, living barriers? I believe we learned about those with the oyster shells. You gotta go through like all these administrators for like 3 years. That's why those permits take so long, because it's up to administrators whether you get them or not. It's not up to law. There's no specific law on it. It's just up to the EPA or something, whatever they want. So that's my grievances with FDR. Obviously, Woodrow Wilson was the cause of that. It was not FDR, but FDR certainly expanded on that to go as a workaround from the American public. So the government is no longer accountable to the American public, as it's the administrators deciding what happens, not the president, and certainly not the legislators. So that's FDR, and that's probably one of the greatest issues that America faces right now. That we don't have that. None of the power is with the legislators or the president even, and it shouldn't be in the president. When the executive was never meant to be the law writing thing, and over time you've seen the executive and the judicial has grown in power extremely, and all of that has been at the expense of the legislative, which the Congress has like a 17% approval rating, 17%, and that's because the Congress is not in fact doing what it's supposed to do. Um, and as the Supreme Court and the President and the administrative agencies have grown, Congress, which used to be regarded as the most powerful branch, has declined since then, and it's really a tragedy because Congress is the only branch of government that actually is built to focus on reason and deliberation and such. And if you think all of the federal government decisions in recent years have been lacking any reason or deliberation, then you can blame FDR and Woodrow Wilson for that. So what else? What my other grievances with FDR? Obviously, FDR was a big racist, and his policies exacerbated redlining. He refused to have African American guests inside of his White House. Jesse Owens comes to mind. And his party at the time was full of segregationists. FDR himself was not a segregationist beyond like redlining and economic policies and all that. Though, interestingly enough, FDR did get a lot of African American vote because a lot of these government programs that he had would give a lot of government programs or give government jobs to African Americans in the South. So that's where oh, I'm sorry, I dropped something and I had to get it with my foot. So he was popular with, I believe the poll numbers of him were like 50% with African Americans, which is something that a Democratic president had not accomplished with African Americans since. What else? My other grievances with FDR. Obviously, internment was one of the worst things that an American president has done. Japanese internment. He decided willy-nilly that it was necessary that every single person of Japanese descent in America should have been put in a internment camp because apparently they were all traitors and such. Though everyone of German descent, they were perfectly fine because, white. What else? Those are my grievances with FDR. So we'll continue reading the article. Yeah. We have to own this. Okay. Did I already read the Facebook thing? Ford captured the general tenor of the crowd. My heart is heavy and I'm so grateful, he said. They're referring to Representative LaShawn Ford. I said in Oak Park that I appreciate white people being out here with black people. Today is a demonstration that not all black people are bad. Not all white people are bad. Not all brown people are bad. Today's a demonstration that we are in it together and that's what we need. Well, one of those statements was contradicted by one of the protesters giving an interview. But speaking after the protest concluded back at Oak Park Village Hall, Ford said, the blending of residents from Austin, Oak Park, and River Forest is an example no other part of the state can match. We can do this without white people. There are white... I'm currently looking for the video of this. Actually, I don't need to find it. So either way, there was this horrible... Wait, hold on. Okay, I'm reading the wrong article. Okay. And then we got this horrible case from the River Forest, Julasco, and to be honest, we don't really know. Heat or air just went on, so if you hear that background noise, that's what that is. We really don't know what happened there. We do know that there was some sort of physical altercation, and updated June 3rd, so what day is it today? It's June 5th. It was June 4th when I started this podcast. An update on the Village of River Forest website late on in the day on June 3rd stated that the alleged offender is now in police custody. Investigators and prosecutors are reviewing videos posted to social media, cell phone videos, store videos, and street camera videos, as well as interviewing all witnesses, including the victim, as part of this process. All police incident and evidence reports will be thoroughly reviewed by the assistant state attorneys assigned to the case, said the update. We have no tolerance for hate in River Forest states. I probably should have said what this was about before starting to get into the article. The headline in this article is according to Maria Maxham at the Wednesday Journal. I think I let you in on the scoop of what's going on with this incident. Police investigating video of apparent racial attack in River Forest Jewel. So, we have no tolerance for hate in River Forest, states the website. We recommend the witnesses that came forward to assist the victim and who provided vital information. We commend the witnesses that came forward to assist the victim and who provided vital information for this investigation. The village said that an update will be provided after the Cook County State Attorney's Office completes its review and recommends appropriate charges. A video posted Wednesday on Twitter appears to show a white man attacking a black woman who was filming him as he walked to his car outside Jewel in River Forest. River Forest police are investigating the incident along with Cook County State Attorney's Office. Police Chief James O'Shea said the alleged victim had left the Jewel parking lot before the police arrived, but that afternoon she was at the police station providing a statement. O'Shea said that the police were talking to multiple witnesses and reviewing video. In the video posted at 10:49 a.m. on June 3rd, the woman follows a man wearing a white Aruba t-shirt and a blue mask. She says, "I'm in Starbucks getting my coffee and this man calls me a black bitch and tells me that this is why everyone's dying." The man doesn't immediately respond. "Do you have anything to say for yourself now?" she asks. She repeats the question. She asked a third time. At this point, he stops and turns to face the camera, hand on hip. He stares at a few moments and then seems to grab or swipe at her phone. "You touch me, I'm going to beat your ass," says the woman. There are struggling noises, but the camera doesn't capture what's going on, though it appears that there is a physical altercation occurring. "Don't effing touch me," yells the woman. "Don't effing touch me. Put your hands on me." The phone seems to have fallen to the ground, capturing two people who seem to be grappling. There are more sounds of struggling then the woman screams loudly and someone in the background says, "Oh," as though commenting on something that just happened. A man is heard in the background saying, "Hey, hey, hey," and what might be the sound of bystanders breaking up the apparent altercation. You can see the video here. I'm not going to show the video because it would be very difficult to do that. Multiple sources shown by the video from Wednesday Journal have identified the man as Robert Paley, a prominent River Forest developers and head of Granite Realty. As of 5:39 p.m. on Wednesday, the company's website has been taken down. The site was fully functional as recently as Wednesday afternoon. The Journal left a voicemail for Paley this afternoon. He has not responded at the hour. A text message was sent to the woman who took the video. She has not responded at this hour. On Twitter, a video was posted with the following description. "I was attacked at Jewel Lasco in Oak Park, Illinois," in response to the poster saying it was actually River Forest Jewel. "While I was trying to purchase Starbucks, this man called me a black bitch and said I couldn't speak English. Then he proceeds to say this is why black people are dying." This is a developing story. Watch for updates. So, there was an update. The guy was charged, and so the charge was that he committed battery against an African-American woman in the parking lot of Jewel Food Store, following verbal exchange that, according to victims and witnesses, was racially motivated. So, what we know of this case from the video is that it starts off, she's following him out there. She says that he called her a black bitch and said, this is why people were dying. And then he doesn't say anything. He ends up stopping, puts his hand on his hip. He swipes at the phone. Allegedly, the phone drops to the ground. The phone on the ground shows a physical altercation. Bystanders try to break it up. And that's what we know from the video. From the police report, it seems that the story that what he said was definitely true. And that's really all we know at this point, that he instigated the fight and he's been charged with battery. So that's what we know of the case. Unfortunately, the video doesn't really capture enough to really, it doesn't capture quite enough, but I'm sure there's store video and witnesses that provide more information, and I'm sure the police have been interviewing those people and getting to the truth. So that is all the stories that we have to cover today on the Lounge with Lou Gilfillan. If I don't end up finding something in the next 30 seconds that would take up a lot of time, which I actually have found, I need to do the legendary locals. So I believe with the legendary locals, the little thing that we left off on was Dan Haley. Was it Dan Haley? It was. Yeah, probably was Dan Haley. Nope, no, it was May Cook. So we're doing Arthur Rapalji. He was a war hero when he was only 20. A kamikaze pilot in the Pacific sank Art Regipali's ship. I guess he goes by Art rather than Arthur. Navy destroyer USS Lucy during World War II. He floated for many hours without a life jacket in shark-infested waters before being rescued. Art became an executive of the family-owned business Rapalji Globes Incorporated, the world's largest manufacturer of globes. Founded by Uncle Luther in the 1920s, Art left that post to sell Oak Park instead of globes. So I assume they're referring to real estate or something. In the 1970s, he helped negotiate the purchase of the Frank Lloyd Wright home and studio, a move now credited with establishing the key role of tourism in Oak Park.